Welcome to Teal Talk, a podcast brought to you by the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. That's OAESV for short. We're your hosts, Taylor
and Lori.
In each episode, we speak with professionals in the field to dive deep into the intersectional issues that affect survivors in Ohio.
Before we begin, we want to give a content warning that we will be discussing sexual violence and other issues that may be upsetting and triggering. If you need help, please feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. Please take care of yourself. Hello, and welcome back to Teal Talk. I'm your host, Lori Hamami, and I have some exciting news. I have a new title. I'm the Resource and Engagement Manager. We love that for me. And of course, I am joined by
Taylor Ucker-Lauderman, Chief Engagement Officer.
We like to joke that we share one brain cell.
We are here today with our one brain cell. We made it happen.
Post-conference, so that brain cell is working hard.
Yeah, it's still intact, but maybe it's a little worn down. It's in its gym clothes hanging out.
Yes. Well, we hope you all loved last month's episode. If you were able to join us at conference, you got to hear the survivor panel live and then just get to hear it again and soak up all that amazing wisdom and knowledge and just experience that we got to hear. And then if you weren't able to join us, you got a little taste, and hopefully it'll entice you to come next year.
Yes, we're building that FOMO.
So tell us a little bit about what we can expect today, Taylor.
Yes, so we got to talk with Emily Dunlap of Advocating Opportunity. We talked about all kinds of things, and y'all just be glad we only kept it to 30 some minutes because there were so many juicy topics in there that are absolutely worth diving into. We talked about safety as a primary concern. We talked a little bit about labor trafficking and men as survivors of trafficking. We talked about voluntary sex work versus human trafficking, and the reality that a lot of times people know their trafficker before the trafficking happens. We even got to hear a little bit about Emily's first case and how that impacted her. So overall, just a really cool experience hearing from somebody that does work that's adjacent to ours and sometimes crosses over, but is still this world that a lot of folks in anti-sexual violence don't really know a lot about.
I personally hope that this conversation helps our listeners think differently about the role of legal work in human trafficking and how it's so much more than just what goes on in a courtroom. Mm-hmm. Well, enjoy. Hi, Emily. We're so excited to have you on Teal Talk. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Advocating Opportunity and then what your work looks like day to day?
Absolutely. It's great to be here, Lori and Taylor. I love OAESB and always happy to collab. My name is Emily Dunlap. I am the managing attorney for the Columbus Office of Advocating Opportunity. And Advocating Opportunity, or AO, which will be how I refer to it for the rest of this, is a nonprofit law firm that serves survivors of human trafficking. So we provide free legal services to survivors as well as in-house holistic advocacy to survivors of human trafficking. That means my day-to-day can look a lot of different ways depending on what is going on. Obviously, first and foremost, I'm a lawyer. So I represent clients, survivors, in whatever their legal matters might be. So I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not the person that goes after the trafficker, though we can be supportive to our clients if they are in the process of an investigation or a prosecution. My job is generally to remove legal obstacles from the paths of survivors. So for us, that generally looks like record expungement. So if someone was forced into human trafficking, whether that be sex trafficking or criminalized labor trafficking. It's not uncommon that they finally leave that situation with a pretty significant criminal record. Our courts still are not great at recognizing survivors of human trafficking when they are defendants in proceedings. And traffickers often leverage the criminal legal system against survivors. So someone does everything right, they get out, they go to treatment, they do what they're supposed to do, but they still can't find a good job or a safe apartment because of a criminal record. So Ohio has a law that allows some survivors to expunge their record, and we are able to utilize that law to clear records across Ohio, which is really great. And it's true expungement, not just sealing. So that's great. We also provide immigration legal services. So survivors who were perhaps lured into the country or brought into the country by a trafficker who made a bunch of promises about what their life would be like. And then upon arrival, after leaving their home, their family, their community, end up in a really terrible situation and trafficked in the United States. We work to help keep them safe in their new home and avoid them going back to a place where they might be in pretty significant danger from the trafficker or the trafficker's associates. And then family law is another big piece of work that we do. So reunifying families, working through maybe divorces or dissolutions for relationships that are perhaps dangerous or just no longer serve the survivor, perhaps reunifying with children that they've been separated from, dealing with things of that nature. So those are probably the three big buckets. We also will do eviction court, civil proceedings, whatever it is that may come up that we are able to handle. And we're lucky that in Columbus, we have a great number of other pro bono legal services that we can collaborate and partner with to meet the needs of survivors. So long story short, that's kind of the gist of what AO does.
Well, thanks for grounding us in the work that you do. I'd love to dig in a little bit about the realities that survivors are navigating when they walk through your doors. What are some of the most pressing legal needs that survivors of human trafficking face?
So there are a whole host of legal needs that someone coming out of a trafficking experience can have. And as I mentioned, that may be first and foremost safety. That may be in the reporting, investigation, and prosecution of the trafficker, which I will say, unfortunately, does not happen terribly often, either because our law enforcement and our courts don't have the resources, or frankly, the survivor, it is not what they want to do. They have left that situation. They do not want to confront their abuser or their trafficker in court. It does not feel like a safe choice for them. So they would like to move on with their lives in a different way. So it may initially just be basic safety. So that might be a protection order. That might be dealing with any legal things that are caught up in the situation. If they broke a lease to get away from where they were, if they need to terminate a relationship with a trafficker that might have been legally binding in family court, things of that nature. And for our immigrant survivors, it is often, I've been threatened with deportation to keep me in this situation for so long. I am terrified that now that I've left, now that I've gotten away, I'm going to be sent back where I'm going to be in danger. My family is in danger. So also working through what the realities of the immigration situation that this person might be faced with and how we can help them navigate through it. So safety is always our first priority. But then, things happen along the way. Like I mentioned, there may be a housing issue where, just because you're out of a trafficking situation doesn't mean you've got a great job and you're set up. So there may be eviction issues that we need to work through. There may be criminal charges leveraged against the individual that we cannot represent them on since we get crime victim funding, but we can accompany them to court, work with their public defender or their court-appointed attorney to try and navigate through that. And my favorite thing about what we do is I think giving an attorney to a survivor is great. I think that lends so much power in a situation where your power has been taken away from you by someone else and systems routinely have ignored or not helped you like they are supposed to. So I think an attorney is a great asset to have in that situation. But if you don't know where you're going to sleep, if you don't know how you're going to feed your kid, if you don't know, where you're going to go for a job, you don't want to talk to me. I'm not the person that's going to be able to help you. So our in-house advocates are able to help bridge those gaps to services for survivors. You need housing, let's connect you to housing resources. Do you need medical care and attention? Let's make sure that happens for you, the provider who's going to listen and respect everything that you need. If you need, childcare, let's talk about Title 20. Let's see if we can get that going. So Our advocates are wonderful because they can also respond really quickly to safety planning and immediate need recognition and access. So I really like our model for that reason, because we can sort of help an individual get to a place where they're able and ready to tackle their legal need.
Mm-hmm. Because there are so many layers, right? A lot of people probably don't think about the realities that human trafficking survivors face, and that they are humans with lives and complexities and things to take care of.
Absolutely.
And it almost makes me think like these are the things that happen after the movie ends.
Yeah.
That nobody is paying attention to.
Yep. That's why we don't tend to use the term rescue anymore, because that's not what's happening. And, things don't just magically get better because someone has left a really awful situation. There's so much to do beyond just getting out of a situation to make sure that someone isn't pushed back into an exploitative situation, either the same one or a different one.
Mm-hmm. Which is so easy in our society and
Absolutely.
capitalism. But that's another podcast episode. But this does kind of lead to another question we have, which is, what are some common misconceptions about survivors of human trafficking that you encounter in your legal work?
Yeah, I think there are, unfortunately, well-meaning, I will say, a lot of misconceptions about what human trafficking is, who it affects, what it looks like. For starters, a good percentage of our clients are male, because often we don't hear about labor trafficking. We don't hear about sex trafficking of men and boys, but it is certainly happening. And we have worked really hard to be able to serve not just domestic minor sex trafficking victims, which I think a lot of services are positioned to serve, which is very important. And we are willing and eager to help all victims of human trafficking. But often, labor trafficking survivors and male survivors are treated as secondary victims almost in the anti-trafficking space. So really helping people understand who a trafficking survivor may be, I think, has been a challenge over the years. The way we write laws, the way we build programming, the way we structure services need to be comprehensive in meeting the needs of all survivors, not just who you think of when you hear the term survivor of human trafficking. So again, that comprehensive picture of who a survivor is, the fact that that kind of, I know, I'm sure you all have talked about this on this podcast, but the idea of a like that perfect survivor, that perfect victim, these are folks who have been through a lot of really complex trauma. Often substance use is leveraged to keep them under the control of a trafficker. We need to have our eyes open to those realities so we can serve people appropriately. What else do I want to get into? There are so many things I could talk about here. That there is a difference between voluntary sex work and human trafficking. Adults, not children, we're talking about adults, can choose to engage in sex work. And just because someone is engaged in commercial sex does not mean that they are a victim of human trafficking. Those are two different things. Treating them as the same thing can also hinder the services that we are trying to provide as anti-trafficking service providers and the laws that we are writing to attempt to combat human trafficking. So that's another common misconception. And that trafficking is often, like so many crimes, an interpersonal crime. We see a lot of things on social media, in our movies, in our television shows about strangers kidnapping someone and trafficking them. Quite frankly, that isn't the reality of the situation. People are trafficked by people who they know, who they are in relationship with. So that could be a prominent community member, that could be a family member, that could be someone they're in a romantic relationship with, it could be a friend. It is a lot closer in these relational circles that I think it often is acknowledged to be in those broader places of discourse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And my understanding too is that very often there can be a lot of coercion involved versus this picture of like someone's grabbing me and I'm kicking and screaming and they're like shoving me in a van. Not saying that doesn't happen, but I think the reality of coercion is not something that the general public likes to acknowledge or accept. And there's like some shame, I think, given around that.
You've absolutely nailed it, Taylor. Federally, we define human trafficking as utilizing force, fraud, or coercion in the trafficking of another person. And I will say coercion is the key in so many of these instances. I often will explain, if you grab somebody off the street, lock them up in a basement, confine them, beat them, force them into a human trafficking situation, as soon as that person is able to get out of there, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go straight to the cops and describe that person within an inch of their life about what they looked like, who they are, where they are. That's not a smart business model, let's say, for a trafficker to utilize. But if you can leverage a relationship, if you can make threats, not even against that individual themselves, but that individual's family, their children, their pets, their siblings, you can leverage those kinds of threats. You can leverage other vulnerabilities that the trafficker is often exploiting in these situations. You don't have to lay a hand on anybody. And most often, yes, we do see a combination of force, fraud, and coercion. We see lies, we see physical abuse, but we also see many, many ways that traffickers can use threats, coercion, those kinds of things to keep people under their control. That emotional and mental manipulation can often be much stronger, and it's not as visible. If you hit somebody, there's going to be a visible bruise, a visible injury as a result. But if you're emotionally and mentally manipulating someone, that's a lot harder to see and utilize as evidence in court.
Mm-hmm. It's clear that survivors of human trafficking aren't just navigating legal paperwork. Like, there's trauma, there's complexity, there's stigma, for sure. You mentioned sexual coercion and how sexual violence can play a role in the human trafficking realm. How do you currently collaborate with rape crisis centers and providers in that field? But also, what do you wish they knew about how to better support survivors of sexual violence who have also experienced human trafficking?
Great question. And absolutely, we collaborate with local sexual violence services providers all the time, because I think the obvious relationship is that if someone experiences sex trafficking, they're also simultaneously experiencing a great deal of sexual assault and abuse. However, we also see sexual assault utilized as a mechanism to keep someone compliant in either sex or labor trafficking situations. So it's not uncommon for labor trafficking survivors to experience sexual assault as a way to keep them under the thumb in the control of the trafficker. We've been really fortunate to collaborate with local sexual violence providers because, yes, we are great at what we do as far as serving human trafficking survivors, but we are not experts in everything. So being able to collaborate with people who are experts in the arena of response to sexual abuse and sexual violence is crucial for us, because we are relying on your expertise as much as you may be relying on ours in the anti-trafficking space. So we find that extraordinarily effective when it comes to holistically meeting the needs of survivors. And then when it comes to what I wish more providers in the sexual violence space understood about human trafficking, y'all are great. I don't have a lot of, critique to bring, but I do think that human trafficking remains really underidentified, and it's not necessarily important to me or to the survivor that every crime that they've ever been a victim of is identified, but there is a massive amount of resources available to human trafficking survivors. There are special remedies available to human trafficking survivors, and being able to recognize human trafficking when it is presenting in a case that you're working may open up those remedies, those potential resources to an individual who really needs them. So being familiar with what human trafficking is, how it presents, how to identify it if the individual is not identifying it as their experience, which most often is the case. It's very rare that we have someone come to us saying, "Yep, I was trafficked, please help me," because they know something bad has happened. They know what happened to them is not right, but they don't always have the language or the understanding of the complexities of our anti-trafficking laws in the United States. So it's our job as professionals to understand what it is, know it when we see it. I'm not here to tell anyone what their experience is or is not, but I am here to let you know that there might be additional resources available to you. So that, I think, is one of the most helpful things in our collaboration, is being able to identify it when we see it so we can continue to collaborate in an effective way.
Awesome. Thank you. Is there a moment or a story, without naming names, of course, that illustrates the impact of your work and why you continue doing it?
This is always so hard. I started this work in 2014 at a fellowship at Ohio State. One of my first cases was a young woman, she wasn't quite 18, who had experienced labor trafficking by a family member after coming to the United States hoping for a good education opportunity, a better, safer life than she was experiencing in her home country. And it was one of my first cases, so I think those always stick with us. It was one of the first T visa applications I ever filed. And we were successfully able to get her a T visa, which gave her 4 years of legal status and permission to work in the United States. We were able to reunify her with her family members. So we were able to get derivative applications approved for her family members, her mom and her siblings back home who were in danger as a result of the trafficking that she had experienced, the alleged debt that she owed the traffickers. They were trying to get at her family to get that alleged debt paid. We were able to, reunify with her with her family members, which is always one of our favorite parts of the job, is to go to the airport and, see families reunify when they haven't seen each other in sometimes a decade. So that's always really wonderful. And this is a case that we were able to stay with over the years, not just because the immigration system is extraordinarily slow. So we were eventually able to move towards getting lawful permanent residency or a green card for this young woman and her family members, but we also were able to represent her in other things that came up. If she got a speeding ticket and was terrified, we would go to court with her and, support her as she got it worked out. If she was experiencing a relationship that included some domestic violence, we were able to support her and advocate for that to get resolved in a manner that was satisfactory to her, to keep her safe. Even if she had left the trafficking situation, doesn't mean life is easy and safe from there on out. Our advocates, holistically worked with her to help her learn English and get a really good job. And she's now started her own business and she's going to own a home. And it's just watching. I think maybe what I'm getting at is my favorite part of this work is that, unlike I think a lot of law firms or legal services agencies, I don't just see someone for the duration of their one legal problem that they've come to us with. We tend to stick with our clients over the years. If they don't need us, great. That's honestly the point, is you don't need a lawyer anymore. But if you do, we will stick with you. So being able to see these really incredible successes take place over time and to get to be even a little part of that person's life is so impactful, and the reason I am still doing this 11 years later. So it's been really wonderful, and those kinds of stories, those kinds of cases are what it's all about.
Absolutely. We say all of this type of work is hard and heart work, right? There's a lot of emotional moments. A lot of those emotions are sad emotions, right? But some of those emotions are positive.
Definitely.
So it's really cool to hear how successful that was.
You mentioned again at the end there that you've been doing this work for 11 years, and it popped this question in my head. I'm curious if in those 11 years you noticed really any shifts that have been positive, or if it's brought to light any changes for you that would truly make a difference for human trafficking survivors in Ohio?
That's a great question because, being in this field for so long, a lot has changed, right? It's still a pretty new area of law, even though this kind of exploitation has been around for centuries. We nationally got an anti-trafficking law in the year 2000. Ohio passed a standalone anti-trafficking law in 2010. So we're still writing and changing and improving the laws around human trafficking nationally and in Ohio. And that's where we've had a lot of success and a lot of opportunity to engage with lawmakers as subject matter experts. And hey, this is what would really be helpful for survivors, or this is something that I understand is very well meaning, but perhaps will end up harming survivors in the long run. So there's been a lot more awareness brought to human trafficking as a crime. And thankfully, over the years, awareness of what human trafficking really looks like, awareness to labor trafficking as an equally, if not more present kind of victimization that people are experiencing. So it's been really wonderful to see the movement grow in that way. Again, getting an expungement law and being able to slowly see it expand and grow and encompass more survivors over the years has been wonderful. Improving our safe harbor law for juvenile survivors of human trafficking who catch juvenile complaints as a result of their victimization, so we aren't punishing child victims of human trafficking for what happened to them, treating them like criminals for the victimization they're experiencing. And it's all still imperfect. We're not always getting it right. But I do see a consistent effort to do better and to not just tell survivors what's right for them, but listen to survivors in making these large scale decisions that are going to affect people long term. So it's a new movement. It's a movement that has made missteps over the years, but I also think it's moving in a really good direction, and I'm really proud to be a part of it.
So apart from, see something, say something, what can folks who are listening to this do to truly better support survivors of trafficking in their communities? Because I feel like with sexual violence survivors, even something as simple as saying, like, I believe you, is a great start. And, you might connect them with the local rape crisis center. I feel like maybe some folks don't know what to do if they came across a situation with a trafficking survivor.
Absolutely. And I mean, the general public, it's very likely that you're not going to know that someone you're talking to has experienced human trafficking, and you're not going to be the person who cracks the case and makes the call. Maybe, but it's, not always the case. But for our listeners who are engaged in, the anti-violence or social services fields, first of all, you're doing this. You're sitting here and listening to me, which is lovely of you. You're trying to get educated. You're trying to learn more. And that is often what I will say is the first step that people can do, is shed those misconceptions about what human trafficking is and what it isn't. Bust those myths, because what you're being told through viral social media posts and television shows about human trafficking often is not the reality of what is happening in your backyard. So follow the experts, listen to people who are working in this field who have experienced human trafficking. There are some really incredible survivor leaders out there that you can follow who are doing incredible work, plugging in a way that supports the work that is being done. We're not reinventing wheels. We're not creating something new. There's a lot of really good work out there that's being done. So plug into that. There are local coalitions you can join. There are so many volunteer opportunities with really great local organizations that you could get involved with. And beyond that, just stay engaged in your community. Traffickers are able to thrive in communities where individuals' needs are not being met and individuals are being made vulnerable by systems, by, a lack of resources in a community. And if we are able to be there for our neighbors, if we are able to mentor the kids in our communities, if we are able to engage in a way that helps meet the needs of our community members, then maybe when a trafficker comes along and looks to exploit somebody, they're not going to fall for it. They're not going to be taken in by that trafficker because they've got other people in their corner and they know what a safe relationship looks like. And they know that if they have needs, that safe people can meet them, because that's often another issue that I think is overlooked, is that this is all stemming from ways we make people vulnerable. And we have a lot of power as people to limit those ways that people are made vulnerable.
You said at the beginning that there's a difference between voluntary sex work and human trafficking. And I know that that's a big conversation and there's a lot of disagreement and everything within the sexual violence, anti-sexual violence field particularly. I still remember a 2019 National Sexual Assault Conference workshop that I went to that ended very heated. It was led by some former sex workers. And so that has sat with me since then. But you said we can actually hinder the support and the help if we treat these two things as being the same. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Absolutely. This is something I've seen over the years. And the first example I'm going to give is a legislative example, because, again, I think our misconceptions being codified into law is one of the most dramatic ways that we see this play out. Recently, a law was introduced in Ohio. It did not ultimately pass, but a law was introduced that would make receiving money that someone should know came from prostitution is a felony. And if we're thinking that all sex work, prostitution for purposes of legislation, is trafficking, then I could see how someone would think, I want to fight trafficking. I want to cut off the money from, this terrible thing that's happening. The reality is that people support themselves at times and all over the country, all over the world, by engaging in commercial sex. And this law is now saying that if a sex worker wants to spend money for rent, for groceries at a corner store, for transportation, and the individual accepting the money knows what that person does for work, that person is committing a felony. And that was just the most wild proposed bill that I have encountered in a little while. And that's just, I think, a really clear example of you're conflating the two. You mean well, you want to stop human trafficking, but in the process, you're trampling on people who are engaging in sex work to meet their needs. And probably survivors who are also perhaps trying to save a little money and spend it to get out of the situation. So it's just short-sighted things like that that I think really lead to harmful results for both survivors of human trafficking and consensual sex workers. I think when we are building programs, creating services, writing policy, if we aren't clear about the nuance, which is not difficult to wrap your head around, the law is very clear that commercial sex in adults is only human trafficking when it is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, that we need to be clear about the differences between the two, and we need to be clear about what is human trafficking and what is not. I think that I have had the opportunity to listen to sex workers, to listen to sex worker rights-led organizations, and that has been deeply impactful in how I do my work, because who am I to say what is and is not a correct choice for someone to make? What is and is not the best choice for someone to make in a situation? What is or is not exploitative to another person? I believe that is best left up to the individual. And I am here to help when I can help, how I can help, and I'm not here to dictate what another person does with their life.
I'm so glad that didn't pass.
Truly.
During that workshop that I mentioned, there were audience members that were insisting on telling the folks who were leading the workshop that they were human trafficking survivors. And it was so uncomfortable and so antithetical to, on the sexual violence services side, the way that we try to be survivor centered and supportive, and we don't use terms that the survivor doesn't use, or like we honor what they say. And in this instance, the facilitators, I don't even think were saying that they were survivors of sexual violence either, which can still be the case in consensual sex work. There are times it becomes unconsensual, right?
Certainly.
But it just was like, you are ending a conversation. You are putting a block where people will not come to you for services. They will not engage in this movement at all if you're going to tell them who they are and what they've been through and make them feel shame for their profession and things like that. So on the sexual violence services side too, I'm like, that's also just not ethical, not cool, not in line with how we approach advocacy either.
Truly. And
Yuck.
that has to be the core of what we do, is that the individual is the expert in their own experience. And again, like me trying to tell like a 16-year-old male client from Central America that he's a victim of human trafficking, are you out of your mind? Like, that person is probably never going to identify that as their experience. And that is okay. That is not my job to make someone identify their lived experience in a particular way. What is my job is to identify what they experienced as, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, whatever it was, and seek the appropriate remedies that are in line with their goals. And it is maddening to me that still is a fight that we have to have in these spaces.
Absolutely.
So to jump off of that, Emily, how would you balance the demands of the legal system and the structure and processes of the legal system with the pace and the needs of the survivor and what they're identifying their experience as and what healing looks like for them?
It can be really difficult to try to utilize the structures that are in place to achieve the goals that an individual may have. And I feel very fortunate to work at Advocating Opportunity, where we truly are client-led, in that whatever the goals, needs, plans of the individual we are working with, that is what we are supporting. It harkens to an example I gave earlier, where if I meet with a survivor and they do not want to, are terrified to, have no interest in speaking to the police about what happened to them, that is not something that I'm going to encourage them to do. There are instances where that may further their goals. For example, to get a T visa in the United States, you have to report the crimes against you to law enforcement. So there are times where we have to have the discussion about, you have identified this goal. This is a step that we need to take to reach this goal. How do you feel about that? but we are never going to put in place processes, systems, plans, goals for clients that they have not identified themselves. Working through a legal system where someone wants justice, someone wants accountability, someone wants to see the individual who hurt them prosecuted in a system that so rarely does so is extraordinarily difficult, because that is not something I as an individual can change. I am not a prosecutor. I am not a detective. I am not a judge. I cannot make those decisions in our criminal legal system for survivors. And that can be really difficult to watch someone. And I'm sure you all in the sexual violence space understand this. Like, how often do we see people who perpetrate sexual violence held accountable for what it is that they've done? And human trafficking mirrors that all the same. So the systems can be really difficult. The systems can be very cruel to survivors. They can be not trauma informed at best and traumatic at worst. So it is really difficult at times to utilize the law and legal systems as remedies for survivors. It is also extraordinarily powerful when it works. The fact that we can eliminate someone's entire criminal record that was caused by their trafficking is life-changing. Not only does it open up all of those doors and all of those opportunities, but it sometimes is that final piece that someone can shed of that terrible thing that happened to them, that emotional and that mental weight that they've still been carrying around, knowing that if someone looks them up, they'll find all of that, and they're still connected to that past through that criminal record. It can be tough, it can be slow, it can be disappointing, but it also can be extraordinarily triumphant.
Such a good quote right there. Ms. Dunlap. That was amazing. You mentioned earlier in the episode the federal definition of human trafficking, which is the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Would you change that definition? And if so, what would you adjust or add?
That is such a good question, and it is a question that I have to grapple with a lot. This happens in working in law all the time. You have to question whether the problem is how the law is written, the problem is how the judge is reading it, the problem is how our system is utilizing the law. It is something I grapple with often as a lawyer. And currently, my answer is no. Federally, I think we've done a pretty good job of defining human trafficking. And most often, what I see attempts at are ways to expand that definition in a way that I think might run afoul of the intention of the anti-trafficking law. Like, who are we looking to capture in this net? Who are we looking to call human traffickers? Because I think sometimes there are attempts to expand the law that would catch people that I don't think we would actually ever truly intend to call human traffickers. Ohio recently expanded its definition of human trafficking. We have force, fraud, and coercion at the federal level, and we use compulsion in Ohio. And Ohio has pretty painstakingly, and I appreciate that, defined what compulsion can look like. Most recently, Ohio included furnishing of a substance or using someone's substance use addiction essentially as a leverage point for power over somebody. And I agree. We see traffickers use substance use disorders as a mechanism of control all the time. And I think that was a great addition. I think the idea that someone can compel someone by furnishing a substance could be a troubling interpretation of the law depending on who is interpreting it. Because are we calling another survivor who gives their friend dope so they're not sick? Are they now implicated in a trafficking scheme? Is a low-level drug dealer now considered a trafficker? I don't know. This hasn't played out, but I do often find myself looking at the definition in that way. And I understand the intention of investigators, detectives, prosecutors want to be able to prosecute traffickers when that is possible. And often it is difficult to do so for many, many reasons. But we have to balance our desire to have a statute under which we can prosecute traffickers with are traffickers really the only people who might be prosecuted under the statute? So I think at present, the federal law does a good job of balancing that. I also hope that we continue to dig into the labor trafficking end of this law and make sure that it is as strong and robust as possible, because we still see so few state and federal prosecutions, investigations of labor trafficking cases.
Thank you so much for humoring me there. I was just curious.
No, it's the best question you could ask a lawyer. Truly.
So true. I also didn't realize that Ohio's definition varied, so that was interesting to learn at the end.
Ooh, I'll throw in an additional tidbit. So federally, if you are under the age of 18 and you are engaged in commercial sex, you're considered a victim of human trafficking, because we understand that children cannot consent to commercial sex. Ohio did not bring our legal definition of sex trafficking up to speed with that federal definition until I believe it was 2021. We were one of the last, if not the last, state to codify that a child engaged in commercial sex does not have to be compelled into commercial sex to be considered a victim of human trafficking. For a while, prosecutors had to prove that a 16 or a 17-year-old was compelled to engage in commercial sex in order for a human trafficking case to stick. So a little tidbit about Ohio. We were real slow to bring our law up to speed with the federal definition when it comes to minor sex trafficking.
It reminds me of like how we only recently got caught up regarding marital rape, one of the last states. Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it as fact, but I am pretty sure Ohio was the last one, because I think other states were just going from 0 to 18, but we had that lingering 16, 17 age of consent hurdle to get over, and it took some doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got there.
We sure did.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for people that continue advocating for those things and really looking at those little gaps that if you're not in it, you're not seeing that.
Truly.
Typical person, even who really cares about the issue, may not know that.
Sorry, I want to say, if you need me to stop talking, I will stop talking, but I have one more clip that I would like to say.
Go for it.
If you're willing to let me go.
Please.
So another thing that I think people don't understand about human trafficking, not only are we not great at recognizing labor trafficking when it happens, because admittedly, labor trafficking is really difficult to identify. Another layer that I think people are just now starting to understand as exploitation and trafficking is that intersection of labor trafficking in criminalized labor. So just because a trafficker is forcing someone to do something that is illegal to make the trafficker money does not make it any less labor trafficking than if you are forcing someone to work on a farm or at a restaurant or in a factory. So we often see labor trafficking survivors who are forced to move drugs, sell drugs, package drugs, hold drugs, or shoplift, or steal, or cash bad checks, or engage in credit card fraud. All of these things that are illegal and often result in a criminal record for the survivor are only happening because the trafficker is forcing them to do it. So that's another thing that I think is often missed, or is a misconception, or is just something that people are just coming around to, is that understanding that just because the labor is criminalized, it can absolutely still be labor trafficking. And we see this, I think, probably slightly disproportionately, especially with children. Adults will utilize kids to do their criminal dirty work because the consequences are seen as less severe, and often are less severe in our juvenile courts. And in familial trafficking situations, as well as gang-based labor trafficking. It's difficult sometimes for our criminal legal systems to wrap their heads around this, but I do think we're getting there. And I think the more we talk about it, the better.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like that comes back a little bit to the idea of the perfect victim, right? The perfect survivor. Well, if they were doing something shady, truly, people maybe aren't as apt to want to feel bad or support them.
It's difficult. It's messy work, but it's good work.
I have a little off the wall question. What is the human trafficking field's perspective or view on social media influencer culture and parents who use their children in their videos and they're monetizing it?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question.
Did I just open a whole can of worms?
I have so many thoughts. Social media gets brought up all the time. I will say that is the first time I have heard that.
Oh, look at me.
Yeah, I thought we were going into like followed me at the grocery store territory, but this is another route.
Yeah, no, I would love like a thesis on, is this labor exploitation? And what's the push from like when it's labor exploitation into, could this be human trafficking?
Yeah.
What would have to be present in these situations for this to be the labor trafficking of children? What a thought.
Ooh, does anyone want to go get a master's degree?
Sure.
Right?
Gosh, yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of opinions about that.
Yeah, I'll be chewing on that for sure. Well, thank you so very much for chatting with us. This was such a wonderful conversation with you. I'm going to share that Emily was like, I've only ever done one podcast before, and it was a little nerdy.
It was about legal writing.
Love it.
But you all have been wonderful. Thank you for dealing with my extreme media phobia.
Oh my gosh. No, thank you.
But you all were lovely. It was really wonderful to get to participate. And thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Teal Talk. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into intersectional issues affecting survivors in Ohio. If you like what you heard, subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review, recommend us to a friend, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at OAESV and Twitter at Ohio Alliance ESV. If you'd like to learn more about us and the services we offer, sign up for our email list, or read a transcript of this episode, visit oaesv.org.
Want to share a comment or ask a question for a future episode? Just click on the link in the show notes to leave us a voicemail. And remember, we're here to help. Feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. See you next time.